You have been lied to about how novels get written. Every craft book, every YouTube video, every writing teacher has told you the same thing. Outline your story, plan your beats, know your ending before you start. Stephen King, the man who's published 64 novels and over 200 short stories, calls that advice the dullard's first choice. Today, I am going to show you exactly how the most prolific fiction writer alive actually works, and I promise you it's the opposite of what you've been taught. Here's what we're covering. First, the brutal daily discipline that makes King's output possible and why skipping even one day destroys your momentum. Second, the fossil theory. King's controversial method that treats plotting like a creative crime. Third, the secret weapon he calls the boys in the basement, and how your subconscious is doing work you're not giving it credit for. Fourth, the Plain Style Toolbox that makes his prose feel like a freight train. And finally, the price King pays for all of this, because his method has a flaw, one he openly admits. Let's dig in. Stephen King writes 2,000 words every single day. Christmas, 2,000 words. His birthday, 2,000 words. 4th of July, Thanksgiving, the day his kid graduated college, 2,000 words. This isn't obsession, this is strategy. King believes that your narrative cutting edge, the sharp focus you have on your story, starts to rust the moment you step away. Leave your draft for a day and your characters begin to stale off. They stop being living people in your head and start becoming cold, fictional constructs. The momentum dies, and when you sit back down, you're not continuing a story, you're trying to resurrect one. He calls his routine creative sleep. Here's what he means. You know how you have a bedtime ritual? Maybe you brush your teeth, arrange your pillows a certain way, or dim the lights? That ritual trains your brain to shift into sleep mode. King argues that writing requires the same thing, a waking ritual that trains your brain to shift into creative mode. Same time every day, same chair, same arrangement of papers, same music blasting. And yes, King wrote to Metallica and AC/DC at full volume when he's a little younger. That wall of sound isn't a distraction, it's a sensory tunnel that blocks out the unpredictable noises of the house and locks him into the story. And the door? Closed, always closed. This isn't just physical isolation, it's thematic isolation. During the first draft, King writes only for himself. He's not thinking about readers, critics, or even his wife. He's telling himself the story. He calls this writing with the door closed, obviously. The door only opens during revision, when the focus shifts from discovering the story to communicating it. Here's the disciplined part that hurts. King aims to finish every first draft within 3 months. One season, 90 days. Why? Because if a draft drags on longer than a season, it starts to feel foreign. You lose the rhythm, the voice of your characters drifts, the emotional texture gets inconsistent. By sprinting through in 90 days, King captures the story as one cohesive unit, not a patchwork of moods written over years. 2,000 words a day, every day, 90 days per draft. The rust is real, and King refuses to let it settle. But here's where King goes to war with almost every writing teacher you've ever heard. Because all that discipline, it's not in service of an outline, it's in service of excavation. Stephen King doesn't plot his novels. Let me say that again. The author of The Shining, It, Misery, The Stand, 64 novels, does not outline. He calls plot the good writer's last resort and the dullard's first choice. Why? Because King believes that plotting creates artificial fiction. When you predetermine the ending, you force your characters to do things they wouldn't naturally do, just to satisfy your outline. The story becomes a marionette show instead of a living thing. So what does he do instead? He excavates. King views stories as fossils that already exist in some undiscovered world. The writer's job isn't to fabricate a skeleton, it's to dig one up. He uses an archaeological metaphor to describe his entire process. The first draft is the shovel. Rough, aggressive, just getting the bulk of the story out of the ground. You're not being delicate. You're unearthing the shape of the beast as fast as you can. Revision is the airbrush and toothbrush. That's when you clean the narrative, reveal the underlying patterns, and carefully expose the details without breaking the artifact. Now, King admits that no matter how careful you are, some breakage is inevitable. Imperfect scenes, clumsy transitions, but he'd rather have a damaged authentic fossil than a perfect artificial reproduction. So, how does he find the fossil in the first place? Two words: what if? King doesn't start with a beginning, middle, and end. He starts with a situation, a pressure cooker. He drops ordinary characters into extraordinary circumstances and watches what happens. Salem's Lot began with what if vampires invaded a small New England town? Cujo began with what if a mother and a son get trapped in their car by a rabid dog? Misery began with what if a famous writer was held hostage by his biggest fan? He doesn't control the outcome. He puts characters in the situation, observes their authentic reactions, and follows where they lead. In The Shining, King didn't plan for Jack Torrance to die. The character's descent into madness, driven by the pressure of the Overlook Hotel, dictated the ending. King distinguishes between plotted novels and situational novels. He admits he's written some plotted books, like Insomnia and Rose Madder, and he describes the experience as stiff and trying too hard. His situational novels? Gerald's Game is one woman handcuffed to a bed. The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon is one kid lost in the woods. Misery is two characters in a house. The simplicity of the situation allows for infinite complexity in the psychological reaction. That's the fossil. That's what you excavate. Now, if you're thinking, okay, but where do these what if situations come from? King has an answer for that too, and it involves a basement and some very strange workers. Stephen King doesn't believe in a delicate muse who sprinkles fairy dust on worthy artists. He believes in the boys in the basement. His mental image of inspiration is a bunch of gruff, blue-collar workers in the basement of his mind. They don't wear berets, they smoke cigars, and they only clock in when they know you're upstairs doing your job. Here's how King describes the mechanism. When he hits a dead end, a plot hole, a scene that won't work, a character who won't cooperate, he doesn't force the solution. He steps away, takes a walk, sleeps on it, does something mundane. And while his conscious mind is occupied, the boys are working. They're sorting through memories, images, half-forgotten ideas, and emotional residue. They're processing the problem laterally, beneath the surface of awareness. Then, often without warning, they send the solution up the mental dumbwaiter, fully formed, ready to use. This isn't mysticism, it's incubation, a recognized phenomenon in creativity research. Your subconscious continues working on problems while your conscious mind rests. King just gave it a name and a personality. But the boys need raw material to work with. You can't expect output if you don't provide input. King feeds his subconscious by reading 70 to 80 books a year. He listens to music obsessively. He observes the world constantly. The more you feed them, the more they have to work with. And sometimes the boys process things you didn't even know you needed to process. When King was a child, he witnessed a friend get struck and killed by a train. He has no conscious memory of the event. His family told him he came home speechless, in shock, unable to explain what happened. That trauma echoes through his work, most directly in the body, the novella adapted as Stand By Me, which centers on a journey to find a dead boy killed by a train. King's writing isn't just entertainment. It's his subconscious searching the black holes of memory, processing what the conscious mind can't touch. The boys in the basement aren't just solving plot problems. They're doing therapy. Now, all of this philosophy means nothing if the prose doesn't work. King's books feel like freight trains. You can't stop reading them, and that's not an accident. It's engineering. Stephen King's prose is often called invisible. You don't notice the writing. You just experience the story. That invisibility is engineered. On writing, King describes a toolbox of stylistic rules that remove friction between the reader and the story. Let me give you the essentials. Rule 1. Use the very first word that comes to mind. It's usually the most vivid. King warns against the anxiety of prestige. That voice in your head that says utilize sounds smarter than use. It doesn't. It sounds pretentious. Write like you talk. Rule 2. Active voice is non-negotiable. Passive voice is for timid writers. The body was carried is weak. He carried the body is strong. For horror, which relies on immediacy and visceral reaction, passive voice is a death sentence. Rule 3. Adverbs are not your friend. King is famous for saying, the road to hell is paved with adverbs. He closed the door firmly is lazy. He slammed the door is vivid. The adverb is a crutch propping up a weak verb. Kill the adverb, find a stronger verb. And King is especially ruthless about adverbs in dialogue attribution. He said ominously? No. If you have to tell the reader the character spoke ominously, you failed to write ominous dialogue. The words should carry the weight. Rule 4. Use brand names. King's characters don't drink soda. They drink Sprite. They don't drive cars, they drive Ford Pintos. They listen to the Ramones. They watch The Twilight Zone or Black Mirror or whatever crazy thing is on Netflix. Critics call this the literary equivalent of a Big Mac, but functionally, it creates verisimilitude. By anchoring the story in recognizable, mundane reality, King lowers your defenses. When the vampire shows up, it shows up in your world. That contrast, the hyper-real versus the unreal, makes the horror intrusive. It feels like a violation of your own life. Rule 5. The paragraph, not the sentence, is the basic unit of rhythm. King pays attention to how the page looks. Short, punchy paragraphs accelerate tension. Denser paragraphs slow things down for exposition. He wants the page to look airy, inviting, so you keep turning. The visual rhythm controls your breathing, your heart rate. It's physical manipulation through typography. This is the Plain Style Toolbox. No pretension, no friction, maximum velocity toward the reader's brain. Now, I've spent minutes telling you how brilliant Stephen King's method is, but I'd be lying to you if I didn't tell you about the cost, because there is one, and King himself admits it. Stephen King has a reputation for weak endings. The novel It builds hundreds of pages of terrifying clown imagery, and then the monster becomes a giant spider. Under the Dome creates this rich, complex town drama, and the dome turns out to be aliens treating humans like ants. The Stand, his magnum opus of post-apocalyptic society, resolves with a literal hand of God detonating a nuclear bomb. Critics have called these endings Deus Ex Machina, cop-outs, betrayals of narrative promise. And here's the thing, this isn't a lack of skill, it's a structural consequence of the fossil theory. When you refuse to outline, you gain character authenticity. Your people do what they would actually do, not what you need them to do. But you lose structural control. You don't know where you're going until you get there. Sometimes the excavation paints you into a corner so tight that only a supernatural explosion can get you out. That's the trade-off. King knows this. He argues that the ending is merely the cessation of the story, not the point of it. Life rarely offers neat resolutions. A pat ending, he says, is often a lie. His mother used to complain about his endings. She wanted closure. He gave her ambiguity. So here's what you need to understand if you're going to use King's method. You're trading structural tightness for emotional authenticity. You're betting that readers will forgive a messy ending if the journey was undeniable. For King, that bet has paid off many, many times. But you need to know what you're signing up for. One more thing before you go. King almost threw away Carrie. It's the book that basically launched his career. He'd written a few pages, got frustrated with his inability to write a convincing female perspective, and then he tossed the manuscript in the trash. His wife, Tabitha, pulled those crumpled pages out of the garbage, smoothed them out, read them, and told him, "You've got something here. I'll help you out with the female parts." Without that intervention, there might be no Stephen King. Tabitha is what King calls his ideal reader. She's the specific audience of one that he writes to please, not a vague public. One person whose taste he trusts absolutely. When the door opens after draft 1, it opens to Tabitha. She tells him what works, what's self-indulgent, what fails. Her notes shape draft 2. And King's revision formula is simple. Second draft equals first draft minus 10%. Cut the fat, tighten the turns, reveal the theme you didn't know you were writing until you finished. Find your ideal reader. Write the first draft for yourself. Write the second draft for them. Cut 10%. That's the King paradigm. 2,000 words a day, every day. 90 days per draft. Excavate the fossil. Don't fabricate the skeleton. Feed the boys in the basement. Use plain style. Know the trade-off with your endings. Find your ideal reader. Cut 10%. Stephen King has given you the blueprint. Kinda. Now it's your turn to dig. And if this helped you, hit subscribe. I break down the methods of master storytellers. Drop a comment telling me, are you a plotter or a pantser? I want to know. And I'll see you in the next one.